The live service genre is one that requires little introduction if you've been gaming for the last 10 years. It's not really a genre in a traditional sense, like an RPG or an FPS. It applies more to what systems the game has overall. The genre relies heavily on repeatable multiplayer gameplay, mostly in a PvE environment that puts you on a gear treadmill in an attempt to grind out gear that is marginally better than what you had before, or even working towards objectives in order to move your profile into higher standing to get unique titles or higher multiplayer ranks. New content is added in a seasonal format in an attempt to get you back every 4 months or playing every week if possible. You may think this sounds very similar to another genre that takes up all of your spare time. And you would be right. The live service genre takes a lot of inspiration from the MMO genre, and the similarities aren't that far-fetched. In fact, the live service genre uses MMOs as inspiration for much of their underlying systems. The MMO genre, as we once knew it, was a monolith that seemed untouchable. What once was one of gaming's most prestigious genres in terms of content to price ratio has now become a shadow of itself, attempting to recapture the lightning in a bottle that made it so special in the first place. They are what could be considered the very first live service games because they were some of the only games to require both an initial fee and a subscription in order to play on a monthly basis. These were games that had seemingly endless amounts of content for the player to explore, battle, trade, craft, and raid through. MMOs are, in their essence, digital third places for players to interact with others and enjoy their leisure time with. I would go deeper into the topic of third places, but that's a subject for another video altogether. But needless to say, this aspect plays a major part in what made MMOs so deeply appealing to many players. They served as spaces where many like-minded people can gather, play together, and discuss what they love most: gaming. The subscription prices of MMOs reflected what you got out of them. You buy the base game, pay a subscription, take months to get to max level, grab the best gear and do the hardest raids, then purchase the expansion that comes out every other year and repeat ad nauseum or until you get bored. MMOs were something that became your job away from your job. They're simply not designed like they are today, where the game actually begins at level cap, but instead the meat of the game was the act of leveling itself. You would spend months getting a character from 1 to cap, but that was because you weren't just there to level. You were there to meet others, engage in the ecosystem, and explore vast worlds that seemed too large for just one person to explore. You were paying for the privilege of exploring digital worlds with the added benefit of getting a tight gameplay loop attached to it, where the dopamine rush of getting that one piece of loot you wanted with +2 crit chance after grinding that one dungeon for 5 hours, man, it was all worth it in the end. You would show off that new gear to your friends and guildmates, and that one piece of loot could be the last thing you needed to get into that raid on Friday night. But over time, the MMO genre had begun feeling stale for many players, and these players craved something new. Many studios tried to capitalize on that craving by attempting to reinvent the genre after the launch of World of Warcraft in 2004, which was, by all measurements, an unmitigated success in every aspect. Not only did it revolutionize the MMO genre, but it also made it accessible in a way MMOs weren't before. Many studios would give their best effort to become the WoW killer in an attempt to take the crown that WoW had held claim to for years and years. But in the end, none of the games simply had the sauce to compete in such a competitive genre, a genre that required such a heavy entrance fee and a dedicated subscription fee to go along with it. Players were already so invested into their WoW characters that dedicating time outside of the game would be considered a huge setback in terms of progress. Players simply didn't have time to take away from the game. And so countless MMOs tried to pry players away from WoW only to crumble over their own ambitions. City of Heroes, Star Wars Galaxies, WildStar, APB, The Secret World, and many more failed MMOs simply couldn't compete with the king, and now they all remain unplayable in an official capacity. All of the man hours that went into crafting these worlds with brilliant minds behind them are now dust in the wind, and the only way to play these games are via private servers that are kept alive by only the most diehard fans. So when the competition just doesn't have what it takes, WoW has the liberty to craft what the genre would look like going forward. Many quality of life features have been made over time. Gone are the long leveling times. Now you just have a weekend to get to max level and then start raiding. Gone is the delayed gratification of getting that massive item level boost by grinding one raid boss. Now everyone has their own personalized loot, and if you can't get it, you can do your weeklies in an attempt to get what you need. Gone are the long treks to get to the raids and dungeons. Now you just use Dungeon Finder to grab an easy leveling group. But it feels like with every major update, the game lost something, a thing that made the original game so special. Many of the more in-depth systems were removed in an attempt to make the game more streamlined, and the majority of the content you bought is simply no longer relevant, or it has been left by the wayside to make room for newer, better systems, because Blizzard knew what it takes to make their games better. Unlike you, the person who plays it for years and years through every iteration. There's that ancient quote by former Blizzard president J. Allen Brack, where during a BlizzCon he was asked if they would entertain the idea of making servers specifically for previous expansions, and he said, quote,
"No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't. Remember when you had to spam cities and say, need a tank, need a tank, need a tank during the Burning Crusade days? You don't remember that because now you just push a button that says go to the dungeon. You don't want to do that. Remember that one bug that really pissed you off that we fixed 2 years ago? Still there in the past."
End quote. Classic stuff. With hindsight, we can see why J. Allen Brack answered the question this way. WoW was much more obtuse and frustrating than it was at that time. The game, when it was released, was imperfect. There were numerous frustration points with it. From a developer perspective, it makes sense, but from a player perspective, it's incredibly tone deaf. Here's this guy telling you that the game you remember playing and loving and spending a large chunk of your life on was bad, that it was imperfect, that you think you want to play it, but you don't. He knows better than you. And I think for many, that was a turning point for WoW. Subscriptions plummeted as the game failed to keep players engaged and they stopped caring. But Blizzard knows better than the players what they want, right? Right? Well, no. They didn't, and the game suffered as a result. What players loved about WoW was gone because the sub fee wasn't going towards a world that you would want to live in anymore. It was going towards a gameplay loop that you either loved or hated based on the systems that were alive during the time, and you had little to no input on the game as a whole. The WoW you loved was gone, and you couldn't play it anymore because that is the nature of the live service game. Clearly, this isn't the case with WoW anymore since they added classic servers, and it seems like WoW is in a better place than it was 5 years ago, but it still burns to think about. The story about WoW is just one of many such examples of live service games failing to keep players engaged and having to walk back many of their changes they made along the way in order to rebuild player sentiment and to keep them invested. But WoW has the leverage to stay alive for this long because it is such a monolith. It has the funding to somehow stay relevant and to keep people staying for longer. And I think a majority of that comes down to the gameplay loop, the loot grind. That is what keeps people playing and coming back for every expansion. Blizzard has somehow perfected the loot game, and you can see this idea leaking out into other live service games. However, away from WoW, the MMO genre has been slowly bleeding itself dry in an attempt to stay relevant in this current era. While there are still a subset of people paying for a subscription fee for a select few games, that subscription fee is often a detractor for many people, with rent skyrocketing, wages remaining stagnant in the form of inflation, and people barely able to make ends meet. The MMO subscription is just one more way to drain your bank account in these trying times. What once was a unique gaming experience that you could only get by paying a sub fee is now something you can find elsewhere and cheaper. While MMOs are slowly dying, publishers and developers started to ask themselves, how can we make MMO money without having to make an MMO? How can we condense down that addictive gameplay loop of grinding marginally better gear pieces while also keeping players engaged enough to spend a lot of money? And so, the live service as we know it today was born. So let's dig deeper into what makes a live service what it is. But real quick, if you like what you've heard so far, please leave a like and subscribe below for more videos like this. It would mean the world to me. Now, let's dive in. The core concept of a live service game is quite dense, but I'll do my best to summarize what makes it so unique. These games are an anomaly in terms of game development because games traditionally are products that have a defined start and end state, then are released, never to be touched again outside of bug patches. Live service games are something that are released and updated and expanded upon over time, with the underlying gameplay systems usually being loot driven because loot loops are one of the easiest systems to iterate upon. The basic gameplay loop copies what made that gear grind so successful in WoW and condenses it into a much more time-friendly format. So instead of grinding for months and months to hit max level, usually you can do it over the course of a week or two. So these are games that are still hobby grade, but require less of an overall time investment, so you can still have responsibilities outside of it. Live services are generally released with bare-bones systems that are meant to be added upon over time, or if systems don't work, they can be replaced wholesale or removed entirely. This has happened more than a few times because most of the time when a live service game launches, its systems are kind of dog shit, okay? But it makes for some pretty good underdog stories. You've probably heard about the success story of Final Fantasy XIV, a personal favorite of mine. When the game was released initially, it was so bad that they completely rebooted it from the ground up. And now it's legit one of the best modern MMOs you can play today with a pretty extensive free trial to boot. And I bet you didn't know that Fortnite was a wave-based tower defense type game before they added the Battle Royale part to it, did ya? That's right, Fortnite launched in 2017 with the Save the World mode to pretty much middling reception, but as a last-ditch effort to capitalize on the success of PUBG, they introduced a Battle Royale mode, and the rest is history. Helldivers 2 released to an ocean of positive press a few months ago and was Sony's first major success in the live service space because of the unique concept of a persistent storyteller who dictates the narrative of the game, with new content being added over time. And let's not forget No Man's Sky. This, to me, is probably the most impressive glow-up in gaming history. No Man's Sky was a game that was set up to fail by Sony after a presentation in front of millions of people that set ambitions far too high. They claimed it would be a procedurally generated solar system with multiplayer, crafting, trade, ship combat, the works, and all supposedly coming from a small indie studio whose prior experience was a side-scroller with funny physics. The game released to a massive amount of criticism, but to no fault of the developers, if you ask me. But they kept their heads down and worked, and worked, and worked, because they knew they could make something special. And every few months, a new update would drop that would substantially change the game. Base building was added, then a story overhaul, then the multiplayer, tech trees, biomes, and so much more. The game that was released in 2016 is unrecognizable in 2024. Each update adds more and more elements that make it more appealing for people to jump in. These are just a few of the success stories I could talk about. I could talk about others, but I think you get the picture. There are definitive pros to live service games. What's good can be iterated upon, and what works can stay. The developers behind these games can alter them in major ways to keep you playing and keep giving you new great stuff over time. There is truly nothing else like it in the gaming space, and these are only things that can be achieved with the live service method of development. But for every live service success, it feels as though there are two failures before it. And with every passing day, another gravestone is inscribed with the name of a live service game that just couldn't get up to snuff. I could go on and on about failed live service games, but let me list out a few notable ones. Anthem was a game behind the much revered studio BioWare, makers of brilliant RPGs with intricate lore. Anthem released to a mighty thud after being stuck in development hell. They promised a beautiful open world with so much to do and a captivating story that kept you locked in from start to finish, but the game failed in every aspect it set out to do. The story sucked, the gameplay was terrible, the server issues made it unable to regain its footing. So now the game as it is today is on life support, and BioWare is now a shell of its former self, attempting to recapture the magic that made the studio a success in the first place. Another massive failure was Evolve, a game that had an amazing concept, an asymmetrical PvP game where one player was a monster and 4 more players were hunters trying to take it down. It clearly had the workings of an amazing game, but the gameplay model was ultimately what killed it in the long run, because everyone wanted to play the monster. No one wanted to play the human hunters. The monster was so much more interesting because it could grow and evolve over the course of the match, but the humans were stagnant and were constantly playing a game of cat and mouse. Now imagine doing that for every single match, hunting after a player who plays his own game while everyone else has to cope because they wanted to play something else. And not for nothing, all of the characters and monsters outside of the launch were locked behind a paywall, and as a result, the player base tumbled and tumbled until the game eventually became unplayable. And finally, Suicide Squad is the most recent failure by another formerly renowned studio. Rocksteady was most well known for their work on the Batman Arkham series, what many considered to be one of the best superhero adaptations of all time. These games were tight experiences with brilliant writing and combat, with each game in the series adding upon what came before. So what did Rocksteady want to do next? Well, certainly not anything that they know how to do well. How about making a multiplayer, live service game with unfunny writing, vomit-inducing gameplay, and an abysmal endgame loop that can't even keep the die-hard fans happy? Yeah, that seems to be working out really well for them. As of now, the game is sitting at player counts of sub 400 players and has been considered a massive financial flop by Warner Brothers. But apparently that's what Rocksteady wanted to do, so who am I to judge, really? These are only a few examples of live service games who have failed massively. So what do all of these failures have in common? Well, they failed to be a good game first and foremost. So apathy took over. They failed to understand that these games needed to be something that you enjoy spending a lot of time in and wanted to play more of. The worlds needed to be engaging and fun to inhabit with others, and that monetization needs to come second. Because in order to compete with the likes of Fortnite and Destiny, you have to be as good as them. Release as much content as them. And if you can't, how can you justify maintaining development? As time goes on, it also feels like more and more games these days are attempting to become live services. Just last year, Sony made a huge push to make over 12 live service games in an attempt to earn as much revenue as possible, because it's cheaper to make one game that you can develop over time instead of making several new games that could all be potential flops. But all of these games are getting canceled. Most notably, the Last of Us live service game that was in development for a long time over at Naughty Dog. I think they're starting to see the writing on the wall that live services are inherently more risky development prospects because they need to be maintained by a talented team of developers. And what do you know, after I wrote and recorded literally all of this, Sony just announced Concord, which looks like a terrible mix between Destiny and Overwatch, and I cannot believe this got greenlit. It looks so bad. What the hell are they doing? Anyway, to be frank, there can only be so many that can occupy the public consciousness, because live service games are ones that require a time and financial investment from the player over a set period of time. People have only so much time in a day, so having to split that time over a select few games is already hard enough. Now imagine throwing an unproven, potentially broken, unfun game into the mix. Do you think people are going to take their time away from a game they know they already enjoy to be able to test the waters on the new hotness? Well, of course they won't. They're going to stick with what works. And that's really the rub with live service. It's making a bet on a house of cards that could topple at any moment. A game launches with faulty servers that aren't corrected for over a month, like Payday 3, your game is basically dead. Push out a series of bad updates with gameplay that people don't enjoy, that's a chunk of the player base that isn't coming back. Remove content that people previously paid for because the games are just getting too big, you're going to be paying for that in goodwill for years upon years. Because once trust is broken, it's hard to make back. This means only the best of the best will survive. And even then, it seems like even the best are hard to maintain. Destiny is a game that I think can be used as a case study for what makes live service both great and terrible at the same time. Bungie were incredibly ambitious with the development of Destiny. They set out to convert the MMO experience that they loved from WoW and make it enjoyable to the masses with the great gunplay and world building that they as a studio were known for. But 10 years of development comes with it many ups and many downs. Destiny 1 released to a lot of flack because the writing was atrocious and the main story was abysmal, but the game itself felt amazing to play, and that's what mattered. So people stuck around. Bungie kept making amazing content for people to play. They stuck around for the raids until they eventually rebooted the franchise with Destiny 2, and it feels like all the lessons Bungie learned with D1 were gone. Here was a game with more issues that also did everything wrong that D1 did, so they had to rebuild player trust trust from the ground up. And for every positive step they took forward, they took 2 steps back with another screw up that the players hated. Not enough multiplayer maps. Content that people paid for was being removed so that the game would be smaller in file size. The expansions were terribly written and short, and the seasonal story model made the game inaccessible for many people because of the FOMO associated with it. It felt like being in an abusive relationship. Bungie kept spitting on the player base because they always knew they would come back because the gameplay was just so good. And yet, Destiny continues to be the gold standard of what live service can be, despite its shortcomings. After the release of Lightfall in 2023, Bungie was acquired by Sony in an attempt to push their live service methods. But Bungie was consistently under-delivering with their financials, so Sony management would have to take over. And to be honest, none of it truly makes any sense. Sony spends all this money to acquire Bungie in the first place, and yet still be underperforming. It's like they knew what they were buying into. How are they just stupid or greedy? How could a game like Destiny constantly flounder for such a prolonged period of time and yet still have such a large player base is beyond understanding. Why would Sony pay so much money to keep this studio if clearly they're not hitting their financials? And well, they bought them because they knew how to develop live service games. It's as simple as that. In a GDC talk discussing the development of Destiny 2, game manager at the time Justin Truman discussed the differences between a boxed product mindset and a service mindset. This guy knows a lot about live service games. He really understands them and how they tick. I really don't want to misinterpret what he has to say, so I'll try to break it down as concisely as possible. His talk boils down to one thing: managing expectations. Expectations for the team, expectations for the publisher, and most importantly, managing expectations for the players. Because when players expect more, they're bound to either over or under deliver. So it's best to never promise anything over the bare minimum of what players expect. So no extra raids, no extra multiplayer maps, no extra missions, nada, because that will be the expectation going forward. To make a comparison, it's hard to follow up something like Smash Ultimate because now players will expect 89 playable characters in the next game. But it's just not very feasible, is it? Live service is not about making a good product. It's about making a reliable, fast service, about delivering content consistently and to a consistent standard. And that, at the end of the day, is what makes live service so bad for the gaming industry. Because this teaches publishers that live service doesn't need to be good. It just needs to be okay for long enough for people to want to spend money. Live service doesn't do anything new or push any boundaries. They're about delivering edible content in a consistent fashion, whether it be good or bad, as long as it just isn't boring. The service mindset requires that players be thinking about the game all the time. So better to make them pissed off with bad content or happy with good content, rather than releasing boring content. So these games thrive on any type of publicity because publicity brings attention and attention brings money. Any attention is good attention. This is the market that live service inhabits. And when you look at it overall, it's really depressing, I think. Live service games are just not feasible in any sense because there are too many things that can go wrong with them. A series of bad updates can be enough to kill what was an amazing experience. And like I said earlier, when player trust is eroded, it's hard to get back. Apathy is the game killer. And without people caring about something, it gets more difficult to shove microtransactions into their face every 5 seconds. Invasive monetization is a massive part of what makes live service so valuable to publishers. These games are constantly in your face with the hot new cosmetics and items, asking you to spend money on something you don't need and offers no value. Which is funny when you consider where we came from. When you spent money on a game subscription, you were getting your money's worth because there was so much content that came along with it. But the subscription fee we once knew has evolved into something more sinister, predatory, and it's called the Season Pass. The monthly subscription has taken the form of a quarterly payment. However, these quarterly payments are very different from a subscription. These seasonal investments into the season passes offered ways for you to get ahead of the game by providing in-game currency, unique cosmetics that others don't have, XP boosts that let you stay on top of the competition, and overall, these season passes just give you a better experience than everyone else. And what's even better, they were all time limited, meaning that if you don't grind up enough XP to unlock everything in the 3 to 4 months the pass was available, everything you didn't unlock in the pass was gone for good. But hey, you could always pay up a few extra dollars to unlock everything all at once. Pretty sweet, huh? The way these season passes work is highly dependent on FOMO, or the fear of missing out. The National Library of Medicine describes FOMO as such, quote, "Fear of missing out is a unique term introduced in 2004 to describe a phenomenon observed on social networking sites. FOMO includes two processes. Firstly, perception of missing out, followed up with a compulsive behavior to maintain these social connections," end quote. Basically, it uses manufactured internal pressure as a way to manipulate yourself into finishing something because of made-up obligations either to yourself or to your friends. FOMO is incredibly important to the business model of live service games, and this is where the majority of money is generated after launch. Or if the game is free to play, this is where all of the money comes from outside of in-game currency. The idea of a season pass is to make you invest financially into the game and to sunk cost fallacy your way to finishing the pass. You already spent the money, you can't just stop playing. And let's see, so this season pass gives you enough credits to buy the next one, so may as well tune in next season to play and maybe get some more stuff, right? The season pass is also a way for publishers and by extension developers to give players what are, for all intents and purposes, worthless cosmetics. These are things that offer no gameplay benefit at all. All they do is change a model or give you new animations. My guy, that's it. I cannot stress this enough. They are completely worthless. They are of little to no value whatsoever unless you're Counter-Strike for some reason. And I hate to be the one that breaks it to you. No one is going to be paying for your League of Legends account. No one cares if you own the $500 Ari skin. It's time to move on. However, I'm not alone in speaking out against this. Even League of Legends gooners have their limits, and it looks like $500 is too much. So, props to that. Season passes are an incredibly predatory business model that banks much of its own success on the promise that the game will be good in the future, that there will be more to come of what you enjoy. But let's look back at what WoW did many, many years ago. They made a bad game that no one wants to play, so people stopped playing. This concept very much applies to live service games as well. Let me be clear. I don't want to in any way dissuade you from playing live service games. I play them myself because I find a decent majority of them to be fun and enjoyable. I mean, who doesn't love shooting the shit with your buddies over a game of no build? Even I am not immune to the allure of Fortnite. I just want people to realize that there is a cost that these games have, not on just their players, but their developers as well. At the end of the day, games live and die by the hands of those that make them. And these live service games are effectively designed by boardrooms in an attempt to get you to spend as much as possible. When games are designed with this mentality, it has a direct effect on the people that make them. Developers need to be constantly delivering content, no matter how good or bad it is. And crunch is an essential part of the live service development model, because when you're never crunching, you're always crunching. There are no brakes on the live service train, because when you pull the brakes, you stop making money. So these devs keep working and working, making mediocre content in an attempt to keep people playing. They are beholden to the whims of the publisher and are obligated to fulfill their demands, because if you don't, your game is as good as dead. It's very much a damned if you do, damned if you don't approach. The game is dying either way. Burnout is inevitable for these developers, and I don't think this is healthy in the long run. And with live service becoming more and more ubiquitous and successful, companies have been researching different ways to drain their player bases. Fortnite, as an example, has both season passes and a subscription service. The subscription jump scare. You remember the subscription service, like from WoW? Well, it's back now, surprise! And it's not just for free games, mind you. They're starting to leak into paid games as well. Just recently, Ubisoft announced that Rainbow Six Siege will be getting a subscription service as an alternative to their season pass system. And needless to say, people were really pleased with it. Oh, I lied. They weren't happy at all. With news of subscription services becoming prevalent again, nothing is truly off the table anymore, and people will happily cough up $80 a year to play their favorite game. I'm not entirely opposed to the idea of subscriptions in games because they allow the people who love the games to get the most out of them. But the way this is executed is just abysmal. Siege already has a mandatory entrance fee of $20. This $20 doesn't even get you all of the content the game has released thus far. It only gets you access to all the maps and game modes. All of the playable characters are an additional purchase through the in-game shop. But hey, if you pay $80, you get everything. $80 for a game released 10 years ago? That, to me, feels like a crime. And now a subscription fee on top of that? Absolutely insane. At least when you buy an MMO expansion, you get all of the previous ones included. Ubisoft is just being greedy for no reason. These games are designed to nickel and dime you at every opportunity, and people are starting to get wise. And at the end of the day, these subs only give you so much value. Cosmetics don't convert into account value, so they're basically worthless once they're unlocked. The similarities we're seeing in live service games as they replicate what MMOs have done and failed to do years and years ago is somewhat funny to me. We have tried and true evidence of how games developed in certain methods launched and failed so many times, and yet companies will still continue to try and get their bag. The hubris it's so telling. And I think what I feel most upset about is that these live service games are fleeting. These games will cease to exist at some point, no matter how you slice it, because that is the nature of a service. The idea of a live service is that they are perpetual pieces of software that are updated until either they are given a sort of narrative send-off or the developers cease development. And to me, it feels antithetical to what a game should be. To me, a game needs to have a definitive beginning, middle, and end. It needs to be a finished product. Because a finished product you can go back and enjoy without having to connect to any online servers or potentially miss any content that will only be in the game for a few months. I'm also not super fond of the idea that games I spend massive amounts of time in can be turned off any day, so I fail to even get invested in the first place. Which, like, why on God's green earth are we viewing games as an investment? Why are we buying half-baked games with the promise that they will be good in the future? Why are we putting so much money into something unfinished and broken when these things should be playable now? We as a gaming community need to normalize games being content rich and playable upon release. If publishers think they can begin charging more for less, all while slipping in a paid cosmetic shop and season pass, things are only going to get worse. The only reason these publishers do this is because they know it works. People are still buying these half-baked goods and cosmetics despite them offering no substantial value to the players. They only have value because these publishers say they have value, and I just don't care anymore. Catch my ass playing default skin in Fortnite, man. See if I care. Well, I totally agree that developers need to get paid for their hard work. At the end of the day, the work they do isn't going towards funding their livelihoods. It isn't even going towards a product that can be enjoyed in perpetuity. Instead, it's going towards a timed, FOMO-based system and lining the pockets of publishers who don't care about the people who make these games. They will happily and constantly beat these developers with deadlines, performance reviews, missed metrics, bad KPIs, and even more negative buzzwords until there is nothing left. The golden piñata is starting to crack, and once it's broken, you can't rebuild that. Live service needs to go. And time will only be the winner in this arrangement. Services are fleeting, but art is everlasting. Games shouldn't be services. They need to be everlasting pieces that have heart, because games are art, and art outlives all of us. Not everyone will be around to experience Destiny, but people will sure as hell be around to experience games like Baldur's Gate and Skyrim for years and years and years to come. Box products need your support now more than ever. So go out and play a finished, feature-rich game by skilled developers, be it AAA or indie. I'm no stranger to live service games myself, but I criticize because I just don't think they're sustainable. The benefits they offer are far, far outweighed by the negatives in terms of gameplay and monetization. If you play these live service games like Overwatch or Siege or Helldivers, I urge you to think twice about buying that big booty skin that you see on the homepage, or the latest Destiny emote of a JoJo pose. That money could be better spent on something that can give you much more enjoyment, especially with how expensive these so-called microtransactions are these days. Fuck it, go out and buy a juicy burger, one that tastes really, really good. It'll give you more value than that Meowskull skin. Trust me. You'll thank me later. Oh man, oh what a video, holy god. This one took a long time to write, but I'm super happy with how it came out. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. It means a lot that someone would listen to my thoughts for such a long period of time. Please let me know what you thought about the video by commenting below. And while you're down there, click the like button and subscribe for more gaming editorials and critiques. I've already seen such immense support since I've started my channel, and it's so encouraging to see so many people resonate with my thoughts. My next video will actually be on a live service game in particular, and it'll hopefully be a bit more positive than this one, so please look forward to it. And as always, this has been Testing Triangles. Thanks for watching.